Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Danielle. I am the outreach coordinator for Northwest Veg. And today we're going to be talking about seitan. And we're going to go in a couple different directions here because seitan is so versatile. And there are a lot of different ways that you can achieve having seitan. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience recently while I was trying to make some. Essentially what seitan is vital wheat gluten, which is just essentially, if you remember some of the other recipes that we've covered either in the sauce series or in this series has been talking about like those important strands that are being built by gluten as we're mixing things. And that's why we don't want to overmix things that have traditional flour in it because we're disturbing those strands. And then we talked about it in the gravy making section the other week when we were making the chicken pot pie and talking about like these chains are building, these starch chains. So what we're doing when you have vital wheat gluten is it's essentially removed the gluten from flour. And so you can make it with just flour and water. It's incredibly tedious and time consuming, and it takes real skill. You can also use just the shortcut and just go get vital wheat gluten. I know Fred Meyer often carries it. Safeways and Albertsons often carry it. Bob's Red Mill is one of the only places that I've seen that makes the small package of vital wheat gluten. So you can do a shortcut and just get the vital wheat gluten instead of washing your flour over and over again to rinse out all of the other flour starch particulates and just be left with the vital wheat gluten. Or you can also just buy seitan. One of my absolute favorite brands is Blackbird. We talked about this with the beef bourguignon. I love to make it with Blackbird seitan. But I wanted to, because it's kind of one of our potentially last rainy days, I wanted to make something that was going to be warm and comforting. And I wanted to make kind of a pot roasty sensation that you would have. And you can also make it into a beef stew. It is up to you on how thick it is. So if you make it more of a runny consistency, then it would be more of a beef stew. But if you want to have it be just like either a little bit thicker or a little bit runnier, depending on how you are used to your pot roast, then that would have more of a, this is a meal and not something in a bowl. But so I took some vital wheat gluten, several different seasonings. I kneaded the dough. I let it sit overnight. And this is what I ended up with. This is just a small sampling of it. And so I'm actually going to open up some of the Blackbird seitan that we're going to be working with so you can see kind of a texture difference here. So this is what seitan should look like. This is how you know you have a good quality seitan, is that it stretches, right? Like you can see I'm pulling and pulling. I'm actually going to put this down under here. I'm pulling and pulling, and you've got this like very meaty, very tense texture. And then when you break it apart, you can see there's almost little strands of meat that you could pull apart. And so if you think of like peeling a banana, that's what we're looking for. That is good seitan. What I managed to accomplish, because I was so excited about this recipe I'd found, I'll break this down underneath here. First of all, the coloring's not bad because this is designed to then slow cook for about an hour and 15 minutes in a pot. But you can see when I break it, it doesn't have, it looks like bread, right? It doesn't have that stretchiness to it as much. And so if you were to try to peel it like a banana, you can see all these air bubbles here. This is not at all like that stringy meatiness. This is spongy. So it came out very disappointing. I was a little bummed out about it. I felt misled perhaps by the recipe, but also I knew after kneading it last night that I didn't have that stretchy texture. And I suspect it might be that my Vital Wheat gluten was old. After it gets exposed to the air, it can kind of lose some of its elasticity. So it's not something that you want to keep in your cabinets forever and ever. But so I was in a situation where I was a little bummed out, but because of my trusty hoarder's freezer, I have plenty of usable seitan. So we're going to go in two different directions today. We're going to make something that I think is a really good winter staple. This is one of, like I said, potentially one of our last chances to enjoy it, is hopefully winter is on its way out. So we're going to make a beef stew or a pot roast. So I made some ahead of time to go with my seitan. I don't have because I didn't end up incorporating my seitan with it, I need to add some, but so you can see this is really good. This is what I would say is kind of like a beef stew. It's a little cloudier. This wouldn't look like just a liquid juice that you've been cooking in because I did make a roux with it. If I wanted this to be super much more thicker, maybe I would have this be more of a pot roast, but the flavor's really good. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna make a beef stew / pot roast, slow cook for you, but it's not gonna take as long as a traditional pot roast would to cook. So that is a benefit for that. So the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and throw on the skillet some of our seitan, and then that way we can get it nice and crisp. So we're actually gonna be incorporating a pretty decent amount of lessons that we have been building on in some of the other cooking series. So if you missed any, don't worry. I'm going to go over a really high level, but if you want to dive down deeper into it, you can always check on some of our other ones. But what I will be accomplishing as I cook this seitan is just like what we were talking about with the roux last week. We are going to be coating it with oil so that it is then protected from the juices and sauces that we're cooking it in, just like with the starch compounds when we make the roux. This is a preference. I like it to have kind of more of a crispy texture, and it can get mushy if it's just kind of hanging out in juices and sauces for a long time. If that doesn't bother you, you absolutely don't have to worry about this step. For this recipe, I'm going to be making it with the rosemary garlic blackbird. So one of the places that I get this from is GTFO. It's vegan. It's an online vegan grocery store. They have hundreds of products. This product is made in the Philadelphia, New York area. And so the fact, I used to ship this from that area. I used to have to buy it bulk and keep it in a commercial freezer for my kitchen. So the fact that you can just order 1-2 packs at a time, stuff like that, it's great. I really, really appreciate it. So they come in different flavors. This one is rosemary. There's also original. There's also chili lime and barbecue. So that's one meal we're gonna make, is this like very comfy, cozy pot roast beef stew. The other thing that we're gonna make is a beef and broccoli dish. However, because I am very passionate about using up ingredients that need to be on their way out, and being versatile in our ingredients that we use, I only had the tiniest little amount of broccoli, but I do have, for some reason, an abundance of kale. It seems like every time I've gone to the store for the last 2 or 3 times, I've thought I probably need kale. So I have a lot of kale that I need to eat up. I also have some slaw from the tempeh tacos, or some cabbage from the tempeh tacos a while ago that really needs to get eaten up. So because all of those are in the same family, broccoli, cabbage, kale, we're gonna play with that and just utilize that. And I think when we add in our soy sauces and our sugars, and a little bit of ginger and things like that, I think it's gonna be still delicious with our seitan and rice. So those are the 2 directions we're gonna go. Right now, for just focusing on the rosemary seitan, I'm gonna go ahead and fry it up. I'm not gonna put that on the camera just because it's not that interesting or exciting. I'm pretty confident you all know what sauteing seitan looks like. But if you are wondering, like, boop, that's what it looks like in my pan. So I'm just gonna go ahead, cook it up. One thing to do, I do wanna note, is sometimes seitan can come in really big chunks like this. That's up to you, that's a personal preference. If you want it to have more of a pot roast feel, then you might wanna leave it in some of those big chunks. If you want it to have more of a beef stew feel, then you might want to go ahead and break it up. The more you break it up, the more evenly the flavors that we're cooking with are going to be distributed. So, but at the same time, if you're going to cook it for 10, 15, 20 minutes in juices, it's, you know, no chunk is so big. It's not a brick of seitan. So it'll be fine with that. The other thing that we're going to go ahead and get started is our roux. So for the roux, just like we did for the sauce series last week, we're going to take 2 tablespoons of olive oil. It doesn't have to be olive oil. It can be any kind of veggie oil that you want. And then we are going to be taking flour. So I have heated this to medium low. So we're going to be taking flour, and we're going to be doing 2 tablespoons roughly of flour. And I want to make sure that this is hot. Yep. And I'm going to go ahead, put that on there. And then we just start whisking immediately. And just to catch folks up who weren't in the sauce series last week, when we make a roux, essentially what we're doing is we are enhancing flavor, because this is going to have kind of a deeper enhanced flavor. It's going to have, this is a very, very loose term of bread, right? It's dough, it's moisture, we're adding heat. So it can have kind of a toasty flavor to it. So we're going to be adding some of the depth of the toastiness to it. Again, when we were making the chicken gravy for the pot pie last time, we kept it very blonde, very light, because you don't want dark flavors with your roux. But with this, we're doing a beef today. So this is going to be a little bit darker. I'm actually going to add just a little bit more oil to this. We don't want it to look like sugar cookie dough. Yes, we want it to be spreadable. We want it to look like kind of a peanut butter or something like that. And a little bit goes a long way. You don't need a ton of this. So we're adding flavor with that enhanced toastiness. And then we are also adding thickness. If you've ever tried to thicken a gravy by adding in just flour into a liquid, you can see that it just turns into a big dough ball. So this is going to, just like what I was talking about with the seitan, this is encapsulating all of those starch particles. The moisture in the oil is allowing the starch particles to make a chain, and then each starch particle is being encased in a fat. So when we add into our liquid, it's going to be in a situation where it can still hold together, but it won't clump together like it does when it's just a flour, a teaspoon or tablespoon of flour. So that helps thicken everything up, but it evenly distributes throughout the liquid. For this recipe, you absolutely can use just a basic beef broth bouillon. Like I am always talking about, I use Edward & Sons, and I really like it. They do offer a low sodium one as well. But I made some homemade veggie stock from our veggie stock series for this pot roast beef stew. And I think it adds a lot of really good depth. There's so much background flavor in that that you can just build off of that, and you're not overpowering it. Sometimes if somebody was going to make something like a tortilla soup maybe or something like that, I would be a little hesitant to have taken the time and energy to have made a homemade veggie stock, because you might overpower it with the seasonings and the chilies and corn and things like that. But for this, I think we're just going to be building off of it instead of paving over it. So I think it's going to be great. And, you know, the sauce slash broth is the star. It's really just going to be complementing the seitan. So we want to make sure that it isn't a kind of dish where someone's just picking out the seitan and eating it because it tastes great, and then it just happens to be floating in pseudo-edible liquid. So you can see I've got some bubbles forming here. We want to just keep attacking that. Last time, like I said, we did it very blonde. And so this would have been, this is about the color I would do if I was making a chicken stock, or not a stock, but a chicken gravy or some kind of chicken sauce. But with this, I am going to make it a little darker, because just like with beef, flavored things. You want a red sauce, you want a red wine. So we want this to have just a little bit darker color. So we want it to have a little nuttier complexion. We want it to have, you want to smell a little bit more of that toasty smell. So I don't want too many bubbles to form because I don't want this to start frying, but I also want to give it a chance to kind of start developing that deeper smell. So it's just every couple minutes I'm going to be stirring this. And I was just telling Jacqueline earlier, we have a cookbook club called Trailblazers Recipe Exploration Club, where we dive into cookbooks, Instagram recipe pages, blogs, and we do a deep dive in one source, so maybe like one cookbook every month, and then we cook from that, and then we all get together online and we chat about what worked, what needed a little help, what did we modify. And so we were all talking about how hard seitan is to make from scratch, and certainly the last time I tried to make it, I made it from flour, and it was incredibly tough and chewy. It was very difficult, but I thought that cutting to the vital wheat gluten stuff would be easier. Still had issues with it. And if you're interested in meeting with us, it is on the second Saturday of every month, and it is at 1:30. I'm sorry, it's at 2:00, the second Saturday of every month. And usually, if it's possible, we try to get a special guest to come and talk. So yesterday, to meet, we had Alicia Simpson, who did the vegan celebrations cookbook. And she was so awesome. She talked about tips for talking to medical professionals about your vegan diet, because she is a certified nutritionist. She has her master's degree in nutrition and public health. So it was great. It was great to talk about recipes and tips and tricks. So you can see this is getting to be a darker color. Let me see if I can bring this up a little higher so you can see. So it's starting to be just a little darker. It's almost like a Dijon mustard color now instead of just white. This is getting closer. I can smell it too. It's starting to smell like toast. You know, like if you've ever toasted almonds or walnuts on the stovetop, when you can start to smell them, you know, okay. So this is starting to have that smell. So I'm going to go ahead and add in my stock. The stock depends on how much you want to make. I'm making just a small amount today. So I'm going to be doing just a little under 2 cups. And so I keep the temperature at the same, and I just whisk. We're just introducing all those little strands of starches together. We want all of that fat and all of those little encapsulated protected starches to be able to mix together. And I also recommend switching over to a spoon. We want to make sure that we're getting it from the sides. We don't want any roux stuck in a little corner. And we just stir, and within about 5 minutes is when we should see this thickening. If it didn't thicken, just like we were talking about last week, there's a couple things we can do. We can add a cornstarch slurry to it. So we can take some cornstarch and some cold water. Usually it's something like 2 tablespoons of water, 1 teaspoon of cornstarch, and you're not going to use all of it. It's just easier to mix at those ratios. And you're going to thoroughly mix it together. And then you're going to put about half a teaspoon at a time. Just do 1/2 teaspoon, mix, see if it thickens. Wait a couple minutes. If it doesn't thicken, you can maybe go in with another 1/2 teaspoon. While this is heating up, I'm going to go ahead and add my thyme. I'm going to be doing about 1/2 teaspoon of thyme. And I also am going to do just about 1/4 teaspoon of sage, just a little bit. And then we want to add in just a little bit of salt. That's going to help unlock, especially because this is not a bouillon. If I had used a bouillon, I probably wouldn't put in the salt because those can be quite salty. But we're just helping unlock some of those flavors with the salt. And then just a touch of black pepper. This is something you can just really make your own, whatever flavors say pot roast or beef stew to you. And so we want to do that seasoning earlier on, just like we've talked about with some of the other sauces series. We want to do it early on. The reason why we didn't do it while we were making the roux is because they just would have gotten encapsulated with the fat and the oil, and they would have been trapped. All that flavor would have been harder to come out. So we want to just keep that, put that in at the very end of the roux, beginning of the brothy series. And then I have chopped up ahead of time some, this is an Asian sweet potato. It has, it's a lot less sweet than a traditional yam or sweet potato. And I've got some carrots and some onion. I'm gonna go ahead and start adding those in. And if you're in a, you'll notice I'm making this in a cast iron pan instead of in a pot. I've talked about that too in the past. I really prefer doing things that benefit from even cooking on a cast iron instead of in some of my thinner pots, just because it radiates heat so evenly in this cooking space. So if you have an uneven cooking range, or my skillet, my cooking range goes from off to 50 really fast. Basically, I can have a pot of soup. My little minimum and maximum is 1 to 9, and I can have a pot of soup sitting on 1 and simmering. So it's intense. So I like to do this in a cast iron skillet. If you don't have one, you can absolutely feel free to do this in any whatever pot works for you. So you can see I don't have everything covered. And if I was in a traditional skillet, I would be worried about that. But because I am in a cast iron, I know heat's radiating equally from all sides here. I'm fine with that. I also see like this is thickening up just a little bit. I expect it to get just a little thicker before I am gonna have it be called a soup or a stew or anything like that. And I'll just give you a quick update. This is my seitan. You can see it's browning. I'm getting some like really good crispness on it. And we don't want this to be charred, right? We don't want it to be crunchy. We don't want someone to be, you know, sitting there eating their beef stew or their pot roast and be crunching away. So we just are searing the outside so that we're protecting it from absorbing any of the juices. It's already got a lot of moisture in it. We don't want to add in extra moisture. So for this guy, I'm going to let him cook on low for the next 15 minutes or so. And I'm going to cover him because I don't want to lose any more of this moisture. So I want all the heat to stay in. And so I'm going to go ahead and keep that going. And I'm actually going to change skillets here so that way he can just continue to cook nice and slow, and we can see what's going on with the beef and broccoli. So I am going to be switching over. We're going to let the soup do its thing and kind of chill. Remember, I have not added the seitan. I'm leaving that for the last 15 minutes, just because, or the last section, depending on how long it takes for your veggies. If I cut them up smaller, they're going to cook faster. But I want to not have them cook. It doesn't need softened or cooked nearly as long as potatoes and carrots do. So by the time the potatoes and carrots are done, this could just be like falling apart. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep it out until maybe the last several minutes. So I've got a sizzling hot pan. I've got my oil. I'm cooking this seitan now. This is for the beef and broccoli. So the nice thing about seitan, here's that big chunk I was talking about. I don't think that's the size I want for my beef and broccoli. Break that up. The nice thing about seitan versus animal products is that it's nice to not be in a situation where you have to marinate things as long. A lot of plant-based meat versions don't need to marinate for nearly the same amount of time that you would if you were doing it with a traditional animal product. So I can go ahead and get started searing this first, because again, if I cooked it just straight with the sauce would caramelize and encapsulate my meat, but the meat still has kind of a spongy, uncooked texture to it. And then you've got this beautiful, like caramelized, saucy outside, and then kind of mushy, undercooked feeling meat on the inside. So before we encapsulate it in our sauce, we want to make sure that it is going to be cooked in such a way that we're going to find appetizing. So we're going to let this cook. And while it is, we're going to go ahead and get our sauces together. I'm going to go ahead and grab some cornstarch. Okay, so for this, you can make one sauce. And then you're going to split it up into two different sections. So first, let's see if I'll use this measuring cup. We're going to take half a cup of water. And then we're going to put in beef broth, which I don't have any of my homemade broth left. So I'm going to take a beef broth bouillon cube. And sadly, my laptop is blocking my microwave. So you might want to, I would recommend microwaving this just so it gets evenly distributed. I'm going to cook it on the stovetop and just keep an eye on it. But if possible, you want to evenly distribute it. And then we're going to put in a little bit of Bragg's and a little bit of, you can do agave, you can do maple syrup, you can do brown sugar. We're doing something that's going to be sweet and going to caramelize. So you can also do a white sugar if for some reason you don't have any brown sugar, molasses. You could do molasses. I feel like that would be touch and go. Molasses has such a strong flavor, and also we are going to be putting a little bit of ginger into this, and I feel like that would end up tasting gingerbready for some reason. So I'm going to go ahead and put my Bragg's in here. Let's see, where has my Bragg's run off to? And move this back. There we go. So we're going to do Bragg's. You can also do soy sauce. You can do, for this meal, I think you wouldn't be amiss to do coconut liquid aminos. They're a little sweeter, but this is a sweet dish, so you can add in that. So we're going to be doing 1/3 of a cup of soy sauce or Bragg. And if you don't have coconut, absolutely don't worry about it. Normal soy sauce, normal Bragg's will work fine. One thing that I really like about Bragg's amino acids is that it has an incredibly high smoke rate. So just traditional soy sauce can burn really fast on a skillet. Bragg's is very heat resistant. So I do really enjoy cooking with Bragg's if I'm going to be sauteing. So then we're going to take 1/2 teaspoon of sesame oil. I'm going to get my industrial size sesame oil. So we're going to do 1/2 teaspoon of sesame oil. Okay, it's so hard to pour from. And then with the brown sugar, the honey, whatever it is that you end up using. Let's see if I put my brown sugar over here. Then we're going to go ahead and do 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, not honey, but there is like the apple honey that I've used in the past, which would be great in this as well. Or also the agave or maple syrup. Just, I would stay away from the molasses. Go ahead and mix that in there. And then we want to take some garlic. Now this can be dried garlic, it can be pressed. You can have fresh garlic and chop it up, whatever works for you. So we're going to take 1 clove, which would be about a teaspoon. I'm going to add that in there. I'm using a little less because I'm using dried. So just like with herbs, dried comes across as a little stronger. So if you're using fresh, use a clove, use a teaspoon, but if you're using dried, go a little light on that. So this is looking done. Again, we don't want this to be crunchy, but I'm seeing some good browning on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this and set it aside. It's important that we don't get our seitans mixed up because we do not want rosemary beef stir fry. Now, real quick, I'm going to go ahead and check on our stew, and I'm going to bring it over so folks can see what we've got going on with it. You can see it's nice and sizzly. It's simmering. My carrots are getting a little tender. So at this moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in 1/3 cup of red wine. Just like in the pasta sauce series we talked about, like you don't want it to be overly fruity. You don't want it to have any kind of tannin. So make sure you're avoiding an oak aged, barrel aged wine or anything like that. And then I am also going to go ahead and add in just 1/2 teaspoon of this Bouquet Kitchen browning. And that's going to give it a deeper flavor, and it's going to kind of brown up the sauce as well. But a little bit of this goes a long way, so you don't want to do too much. And then I'm going to go ahead and cover it again and let it continue to cook. All right, so with this, I'm going to go ahead and take some more oil, put this on here. You could use broth in this situation if you wanted to. So as I said earlier, since I don't have a lot of broccoli, I have gone ahead and cut up kale stems, and then I have my purple cabbage from some slaw. So what the golden rule is, just try to make sure things are as close to proportional as possible. So I cut up the broccoli fairly small because it's going to have to cook at the same rate as some of this cabbage leaves. And then, I went ahead and de-stemmed the kale, and we're just going to be using the kale stems for right now. And then we're going to add in the leaves. But the leaves cook so much faster that we wouldn't want that to be competing. They would wilt. They would just turn into mush by the time that was done. So we're going to go ahead. We're cooking this up. Same as the beef. We're kind of just tossing it in oil, getting it encapsulated, letting it crisp up, letting it have its own chemical reaction. And then we're going to add in our sauce. So I said we were going to make this sauce into 2 different things. One thing is we're going to marinate. We're going to do a quick marinade because this meat's already cooked. Just going to sit in it for like 5 minutes. We're going to pour just a splash on our seitan, and then we're going to cook the rest of it. But we're going to add in just a touch of cornstarch so it actually clings to it. The sugar will help. It'll caramelize. But we want to make sure that it isn't just like a drippy sauce. We want it to actually, we don't want it to feel like beef, broccoli, and broth. We want it to have like that nice glazy sauce. So I'm just trying to beat in that cube of bouillon. And then I would say, so I've got, this is my plate. You can put it in a bowl. I'm just gonna drizzle maybe 1/4 cup of this sauce onto the beef or onto the seitan. And if you like spicy, I would put chili oil in that as well. And then now let's go ahead and add in some ginger. Let's see where my ginger has gone. So if you're using fresh ginger, I would go ahead and put it in now. You don't want it to cook as it would burn if you put it in immediately with the same as the beef and the broccoli and everything, or the broccoli and the stems and the cabbage. But it does need to cook up because, you know, ginger has that stemmy, woody, you want to skin it, but it still is stringy. If you're using dry ginger, like a powder, then we're going to want to do half of a teaspoon of it. I am using lightly dried ginger. I'll show you what the texture here is. You can see it's just kind of, there's freeze-dried ginger, which is okay too. But because I'm using it, it's very similar to fresh ginger, so I'm going to use the full teaspoon and just add that into my sauce. And now we're going to take 1 teaspoon of cornstarch and we're going to beat that into our sauce. And don't forget to stir so we're not burning everything. Yes, we've got stuff browning really nicely. We've got a lot of steam coming up. All right, I'm going to turn this down. Turn this down. Okay, so I can see everything's cooking very nicely. I went ahead and turned things down because I don't want the cabbage or anything to burn. I can see some leaves getting pretty brown. Again, I have such a sensitive skillet, such a sensitive stovetop. So I went ahead and turned it down. This is a great time to go ahead and add in our sauce. So I just want to whisk it so we get that cornstarch incorporated. It's okay if you have some lumps because we're gonna cook it out anyways. But we don't want it to be like one big lump, like what we were talking about with the flour. Yeah, this is looking good. I'm gonna go ahead and pour this whole sauce in here. And so stuff, you can see already it's caramelizing. See how when I drag my spoon across, it's staying separate. So this is a time for us to be very active on stirring. Because we don't want this to burn because this is now almost becoming a solid state. And we are not looking for it to be like a pancake where we're flipping it or anything like that. And I think with the purple and the green, I think this is gonna look really beautiful, served on some white rice. Yeah, this is gonna look really, really good. One last thing I'm gonna do for my pot roast stew while this is kind of cooking, I'm actually gonna cover this just because I want the broccoli florets to get just a light steaming really, really quickly. We don't wanna cover it for too long because then the moisture will get locked in and it will get mushy. But I'm gonna go ahead and show you the browning liquid and the wine has done a really good job. It's deepened that flavor. So this is totally optional, but I think it's something that's very good for a anytime you're doing a pot roast or anything like this. Adding in some porcini, ground dried porcini mushrooms. Again, a little bit of this goes a long way. I would do a teaspoon. It's got that umami. A lot of people just call it umami flavor. So it's gonna have kind of a meaty texture, like it just is, it's likened to being one of the senses, like, or one of the senses for your tongue, sweet, salty, sour. So umami is one of those. And so it's just like really good, savory, mouth satisfaction, I think is what it translates to. So I'm going to put in just half a teaspoon of this into our broth or into our stew here. And then I'm going to mix it together vigorously with our whisk, let it get in there. And I do it at the end just because I don't want it to scald. I don't like, you can overcook it very easily and then you've lost that umami flavor. So I like to go ahead and just have it be put in a little bit towards the end. And I've incorporated it. So now I'm going to cover it back up. And then in about 5 minutes, we'll put in our seitan so it can start cooking into those juices. In the meantime, this is looking great. This is ready for, we're going to do both. We're going to add in our seitan that's just been sitting in this little bit of extra moisture. So it's soaked up, even though we've coated it with our crisping. It has soaked up a decent amount of that moisture, but it's okay because it's not going to just be extra spongy. It still has remained firm because we did cook it. And then if you want, if you're somebody who likes these textures mixed together, you can add in the kale leaves. They go in last just because, again, like I said, they cook so quickly. So anytime I'm making them in a soup or a stew, I put them in last. But I think I have so much kale that I'm just gonna put that in. And it's nice to tear them up. You don't want somebody to have to like get one big chopstick of half of a kale leaf. And this recipe is nice. I'm excited for this just because I'm always happy to use recipes that help me use up the kale stems. A lot of times you're de-stemming the kale and then you're just using the leaves because they don't cook evenly. So if you were chopping up kale to put in a pasta or something, you would de-stem it first because otherwise you're gonna have a crunchy, maybe bitter tasting stem. And then you would have this like sweet, nice, tender leaf. And then that could be very disappointing mouthfeel wise. So well, I think that's all I'll add for right now. And then I'm going to stir it up so we can evenly distribute the sauce and the heat. And because we do like things spicy in this house, I think I'm going to add in a little bit of chili oil with that because I think that'll be really nice. And I am going to cover this again for no more than 2 minutes. I want to help this kale have a chance to kind of cook down and not be so wiry and fluffy. So I'll go ahead and cover that. And then in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and bring this stew over so that we can look at it while we're letting this simmer away. This would also be really good on rice. So our carrots are getting nice and cooked. Sweet potato, of course, cooks very quickly. So we're not in any danger of it needing to cook more. Let's see how the carrots are doing. Carrots are soft, but they are going to need to cook for just a little longer. Those Chinese carrots that I've used that we mentioned in the chicken pot pie, they do take a while to cook. But the sweet potato is looking good. It's nice and soft. So I'm going to let this cook another 5 minutes, keep it covered. We can see my sauce is thickening up just a little bit. It'll thicken up more as it cools. I might put a little bit of cornstarch in this, but the browning liquid looks like it's done a great job. So we'll let this just kind of simmer for a second. And I'm going to go ahead and let's do on a plate. I'm going to take this off because again, we don't want everything to be wilty. I don't want things to get mushy, and that can happen so quickly. Yes, this is looking really nice. So I'm going to go ahead, add in some chili oil, and then I'm going to load up my plate with some rice. Let this cook for just a second more. So I really like, this is made in Canada, chili oil called Big Mom #2. It's so delicious, but any chili oil, even I know Fred Meyer has a couple of options of just chili oil, which is I think it's literally just canola oil and chilies is fine. I usually always make mine last longer because you always end up with more sediment at the bottom. I just add in more sesame oil. So just do a light drizzle depending on how spicy you like things. And stir that up. Yeah, I think this is very pretty. And it's a really good use of that purple cabbage. Purple cabbage can be tricky because it's not as sweet as green cabbage. So sometimes it can have a little more bitter aftertaste to it. So I'm very happy to have an opportunity, I think with all of the ginger and the soy sauce and the sugar, that it's going to be fine with that. So I don't think we need to worry too much. So I'm going to go grab some rice. So I've got my rice plate here with my very dapper ram, and let's see, I'm actually going to use my ladle. And again, you can see even with that extra moisture from the marinade that we put in and the moisture that the kale, the cabbage, all of that's giving off, it's still, the sauce is not runny. It's not a gravy because we don't want it to be thick like gravy, but when I separate it, it isn't immediately sloshing back, and that's just what we're looking for. So go ahead and just pop some of this on here. There we go. Yeah. Go ahead and turn off the heat on that. Set this over here. And now I'm gonna swap this out so we can put our pot roast or beef stew on here. And this is the perfect time for us to go ahead. I've turned off the heat, so I don't think it needs to cook too much more. I think it's going to do a lot of its cooking. Yeah, the carrots are now nice and soft. I've pierced through it nice and easily. Same with the potatoes. So I'm going to wait to see if it thickens up. I probably am going to go ahead and add in some cornstarch. But first, I'm going to go ahead and add in my seitan because it's going to soak up a lot of liquid as well. Now, just again, as a preference, if you want this to have a pot roast feel, then I would recommend that you cook, you make your potatoes and your carrots and your onion chunks quite big. But if you wanted this to have more of a stew feel, then, you know, you would want to cut them smaller so that they feel like it is more of easily eaten with a spoon. So I went with wanting to have it have kind of a pot roast feel. And we just want to gently make sure that the seitan is getting covered. Everybody else has had time in the little bath. We want to make sure that this is getting a chance. And another thing we could have done to help thicken things up is we could have cooked, when we were cooking up the seitan, we could have tossed it in a little bit of cornstarch as well. I don't think that's really necessary. We know that we can just add in stuff if we need to. But yeah, I think this is looking really good. I think it's going to be perfect for the rainy day that we have today. And Yeah, I think this is a great way to showcase seitan. So we've got two very different strong flavors going on here that I think I would absolutely showcase to somebody who was maybe an omnivore, somebody who's not sure. Seitan is definitely one of my go-to mock meats. So if somebody is like, I don't know, I think that tofu is bland and I don't like the texture of tempeh because it's weird and I'm not used to it. If you get good quality seitan, then it has a very strong mouthfeel similar to a lot of the animals that the omnivore is eating. But also, I mean, you can make carne asada with it. You can make stir fries with it, all kinds of things. It's very, very versatile, and it doesn't have a strong flavor that you're trying to overcome. When we were talking with the tempeh, we were talking about some people can find it having kind of a bitter taste to it, but seitan is just flour, so it's not going to have an over the top taste that you're trying to overcome. So I think between that and the mouth texture and how readily it sits in gravies and sauces and it can absorb it without turning to mush, which sometimes you can struggle with tofu. I think we've got two meals that would probably satisfy most of the folks that I would encounter if they were in a situation wanting to try vegan food. Let me see if I can. Yeah, so we've got this for our beef and broccoli, which is actually a broccoli family vegetable stir fry. And then we've got a hearty beef stew or pot roast setup. Now, if I wanted this to have more of a pot roast feel, I'd probably take this, put it in the oven at 350 for probably about 10 minutes, just to have it ambiently cook instead of all from the bottom, and then pull it out, let it sit for 5 minutes and serve. If you're looking for it to have more of a beef stew flavor, then I think it is ready to go as soon as you are happy with the texture that your sauce has. So if you feel like this is what you're looking for in a beef stew, it's ready to go. Yeah, so does anybody have any questions? Or any seitan tips for people who are trying to make seitan at home? If you have any insights or if you have any questions, feel free to email me at Danielle@nwveg.org.